In 3 seconds, $4 million of Russian armor became scrap metal. The crew never saw it coming. No airstrike, no anti-tank missile. Just mathematics, coordination, and a 155mm shell traveling faster than sound. This is the Invisible War, a revolution in artillery that's rewriting every rule of mechanized combat. And it's happening right now on the fields of Eastern Europe, where Ukrainian gunners are proving that the king of battle has evolved. For over a century, artillery has been called the king of battle, but it's always had one fundamental problem: you can't see your target. Unlike infantry with rifles or tanks with direct fire cannons, artillery crews launch projectiles over horizons, across valleys, beyond their line of sight. They depend entirely on someone else: forward observers, reconnaissance units, aerial spotters to tell them where to aim. In the Cold War, this meant slow, cumbersome communication chains. A forward observer would spot enemy armor, radio coordinates back to a fire direction center. Officers would calculate firing solutions with paper charts and slide rules. And minutes, sometimes tens of minutes, would pass before shells landed on target. By then, the tanks had moved. The element of surprise was gone. Artillery was devastating against fixed positions and infantry formations. But against mobile armor, it was like trying to hit a moving car from a mile away, blindfolded. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, they brought with them over 3,000 main battle tanks. Ukraine had perhaps 500 operational vehicles and artillery systems that were on paper outmatched and outnumbered. But Ukraine had something Russia didn't anticipate. They had adapted, they had innovated, and they were about to demonstrate that in modern warfare, it's not the size of the gun that matters, it's how precisely you can aim it. March 2022, the world watched in horror as satellite images revealed a 40-mile-long Russian convoy approaching Kyiv. Thousands of vehicles, tanks, supply trucks, artillery pieces, a mechanized fist aimed at Ukraine's heart. But then, something remarkable happened. The convoy stalled, not because of Ukrainian jets. Russia controlled the skies, not because of tank battles. Ukraine was outnumbered. The convoy stalled because Ukrainian artillery, guided by commercial drones and civilian-operated reconnaissance, began systematically destroying key vehicles. Here's how it worked. Small teams of Ukrainian forward observers, often using commercial quadcopter drones purchased online, would identify high-value targets: fuel trucks, command vehicles, bridge crossing equipment. They'd send GPS coordinates via encrypted messaging apps to artillery batteries positioned miles away. Ukrainian gunners would input those coordinates into fire control computers, some modern, some improvised from laptop software, calculate the firing solution in seconds, and launch precision strikes before Russian forces could react. The results were devastating. Fuel trucks exploded, blocking narrow roads. Command vehicles were destroyed, severing communication. Bridge-laying equipment was eliminated, preventing river crossings. The convoy didn't need to be destroyed entirely. It just needed to be paralyzed, and paralyzed it was. The psychological impact was immediate. Russian tank crews, expecting to fight Ukrainian armor in open combat, instead found themselves under constant threat from an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't effectively counter. Ukrainian artillery crews began developing a rhythm, what they called shoot and scoot: fire 3 to 5 rounds at a target, then immediately relocate before Russian counter-battery fire could arrive. Speed became survival. This wasn't the artillery warfare of World War II, where massive batteries would bombard the same positions for hours. This was a deadly game of chess played at the speed of fiber-optic communication, and Ukraine was winning. The weapon that changed everything wasn't a gun, it was a camera. Traditional artillery reconnaissance required humans to move dangerously close to enemy positions, expose themselves to observe targets, and communicate coordinates through vulnerable radio networks. One observer could cover maybe a square kilometer of territory. A single drone could surveil 50 square kilometers, transmit real-time high-definition video, identify targets using thermal imaging, and remain airborne for hours, all while the operator stayed safely behind friendly lines. Ukraine embraced this technology with remarkable speed. Military units partnered with volunteer drone operators. Crowdfunding campaigns purchased commercial drones. Tech-savvy civilians developed custom software to integrate drone feeds directly with artillery fire control systems. By mid-2022, some Ukrainian artillery units had achieved what Western militaries call sensor-to-shooter, times of under 60 seconds. That means from the moment a target was identified to the moment shells began impacting, less than a minute elapsed. Compare that to traditional methods, which might take 5 to 15 minutes. For a tank moving at 40 kilometers per hour, that difference is literally the difference between a direct hit and missing by over 10 kilometers. Then came the Western systems. In April 2022, the United States began supplying M777 howitzers, modern GPS-guided artillery with significantly longer range than Soviet-era systems. Canada, Australia, and NATO allies followed suit. The M777 fires 155mm shells up to 30 kilometers with conventional ammunition, and up to 40 kilometers with rocket-assisted projectiles. More importantly, it can fire GPS-guided Excalibur rounds, shells that can hit within 10 meters of their target from that distance. Imagine the tactical implications. A Russian tank column advances. A Ukrainian drone spots them at 25 kilometers. Coordinates are transmitted. An M777 crew, positioned 30 kilometers away, fires a GPS-guided Excalibur shell. The projectile adjusts its trajectory mid-flight using satellite navigation. 30 seconds later, a 60-pound explosive strikes within meters of a specific tank. The tank crew doesn't hear the incoming round. There's no warning. One moment they're advancing. The next, their vehicle is a burning wreck. But perhaps the most significant Western contribution was HIMARS, the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System. HIMARS isn't traditional artillery. It's a precision rocket launcher capable of hitting targets up to 80 kilometers away with accuracy measured in meters. Each rocket carries a 200-pound warhead, enough to obliterate command posts, ammunition depots, and armored formations. With HIMARS, Ukraine gained the ability to strike Russian forces far behind the front lines. Logistics hubs that were considered safe suddenly became vulnerable. Tank staging areas were devastated. Artillery positions were eliminated before they could fire a shot. Russia was forced to move its supply bases and command centers over 100 kilometers from the front, drastically complicating their logistics and slowing their operations. The invisible war was extending deeper into Russian-controlled territory. Let's break down a real strike. Summer 2023. Russian forces are attempting to advance near Bakhmut. Intelligence reports indicate a tank company, approximately 10 T-72 and T-90 main battle tanks, is staging for an assault. Phase 1. Reconnaissance. Ukrainian drone operators launch multiple quadcopters from positions 5 to 10 kilometers behind their lines. These drones are small, cheap, and difficult to detect. They fly low, using terrain masking to avoid Russian air defense radars. The drones identify the tank company assembling in a tree line, a common concealment tactic. The operators mark each vehicle's position with GPS coordinates accurate to within 3 meters. Phase 2. Targeting decision. The coordinates are transmitted to a fire direction center, sometimes a hardened bunker, sometimes just a reinforced tent with laptop computers. Artillery officers analyze the targets. They must decide which artillery system is optimal for this target. The tanks are 22 kilometers away. M777 howitzers can reach them with standard ammunition. But the officers choose something else. A Paladin M109 self-propelled howitzer using rocket-assisted projectiles. Why the Paladin? Because it's mounted on tracks. After firing, it can relocate within 2 minutes, critical for avoiding Russian counter-battery fire. The Paladin moves to a pre-surveyed firing position, one of dozens Ukrainian forces have prepared across their defensive zone. Phase 3. Firing solution. The fire control computer calculates everything: distance to target, altitude difference, wind speed and direction, air pressure, temperature, even the Earth's rotation. This process once took trained officers 5 to 10 minutes with paper charts. Now it takes 15 seconds. The computer provides the gun crew with 2 numbers: azimuth, the direction to aim, and elevation, the angle of the barrel. The crew adjusts the 155mm howitzer accordingly. Phase 4. Fire mission. The Paladin fires, not 1 round, but 6, in rapid succession, a technique called time on target. The shells are fired at slightly different trajectories and propellant charges. calculated so all 6 arrive at the target simultaneously. Why simultaneous impact? Because Russian tanks have reactive armor, explosive plates that can defeat a single hit. But 6 shells striking the same area within seconds, the reactive armor is overwhelmed. Secondary explosions, penetration, catastrophic kills. The shells travel in a high arc, reaching altitudes of 10,000 feet before plunging down at supersonic speeds. Impact. 3 of the 10 tanks are destroyed outright, their ammunition igniting in characteristic turret-tossing explosions. 2 more are damaged and immobile. The remaining 5 scatter, abandoning their staging position. Phase 5. Displacement. The Paladin crew has 90 seconds to relocate. Russian counter-battery radars detected the Paladin's firing signature, calculated its position, and are already transmitting coordinates to their own artillery. Russian shells impact the firing position. Too late. The Paladin is already 2 kilometers away, concealed under camouflage, while Ukrainian electronic warfare units jam Russian communications, preventing follow-up strikes. Total time from target identification to strike, 6 minutes. Russian casualties: 3 tanks destroyed, 2 disabled, 15 to 20 crew members killed or wounded. Ukrainian casualties: 0. Welcome to 21st century artillery warfare. But artillery strikes on Russian tanks are only half the story. The other half is a deadly game of hide-and-seek happening every hour, every day, across hundreds of kilometers of front line. It's called counter-battery warfare, artillery hunting. Artillery. Modern counter-battery radars can detect the moment an artillery piece fires. They track the shell's trajectory backwards, calculating the firing position within seconds. Then they transmit those coordinates to friendly artillery, which attempts to destroy the enemy guns before they can relocate. This creates an incredibly dangerous environment for artillery crews on both sides. Fire your weapon and you've just painted a target on your back. The enemy knows where you are, and shells will begin falling within minutes, sometimes seconds. Survival depends on speed. Ukrainian crews have refined shoot and scoot to an art form. Some units can fire, pack, and relocate in under 3 minutes. The difference between 3 minutes and 4 minutes is often the difference between life and death. The casualties tell the story. Early in the war, both sides lost significant artillery assets to counter battery fire. But Ukraine adapted faster. They dispersed their forces more effectively, used better camouflage discipline, and employed electronic warfare to disrupt Russian targeting. Ukrainian units began constructing decoy firing positions, realistic-looking artillery setups designed to attract Russian fire, while the real guns operated from nearby concealed locations. Russian artillery would waste ammunition striking empty positions while Ukrainian guns remained operational. Electronic warfare became equally critical. Ukrainian forces deployed jamming systems that disrupted Russian communications, GPS signals, and even drone controls. Russian artillery crews found their targeting data corrupted, their drone feeds interrupted, their coordination deteriorating. By 2024, estimates suggested Ukraine was maintaining a favorable exchange ratio in the counter-battery fight, destroying more Russian artillery systems than they were losing. This was remarkable given Russia's initial numerical advantage. The key was integration. Ukrainian forces combined drones for reconnaissance, radar for counter-battery detection, electronic warfare for disruption, and precision artillery for strikes, all coordinated through digital systems that enabled near-instantaneous response. Russia, despite its larger arsenal, struggled with coordination. Their systems were often older, incompatible, and operated by units with poor communication between them. They had the guns, but they lacked the network to use them optimally. But beyond tactics and technology, there's a human dimension to this artillery war. And for Russian tank crews, it's a waking nightmare. Imagine being inside a T-72 tank. You're sealed in a steel box with 2 other crew members. Visibility is limited to small periscopes and targeting optics. You hear the rumble of your own engine, the creak of suspension, the radio chatter of your unit. Then, without warning, nothing. No explosion, just a flash, and you cease to exist. That's how artillery kills tanks. The crew doesn't hear the incoming shell. It's traveling faster than sound. By the time the sound wave reaches them, the warhead has already penetrated the armor, and the tank's ammunition is exploding. Russian doctrine traditionally relied on massed armor assaults overwhelming the enemy with numbers. But that doctrine was built for a different era, when artillery couldn't efficiently target moving vehicles. Now, every time a Russian tank leaves concealment, it becomes a potential target for artillery that can strike with minimal warning. The psychological effect has been devastating. Intercepted Russian communications revealed tank crews refusing orders to advance, abandoning vehicles before combat, and expressing terror at the prospect of crossing open terrain. Ukrainian artillery has effectively rendered large portions of the battlefield impassable for Russian armor. Any concentration of tanks draws immediate fire. Any assault across open ground becomes a death sentence. Ukrainian commanders report that Russian armored tactics have become increasingly cautious, almost paralyzed. Units that once conducted aggressive armored maneuvers now rely primarily on artillery duels and infantry assaults, keeping their precious remaining tanks concealed and stationary. This represents a fundamental shift. The force that invaded Ukraine with visions of rapid mechanized conquest has been reduced to a grinding defensive posture in large part because their armor can no longer maneuver freely under the constant threat of precision artillery. Estimates of Russian tank losses vary, but open-source intelligence tracking, using verified photographic evidence, documents over 2,000 Russian tanks destroyed, damaged, or abandoned. The true number is likely higher. Each one represents not just millions of dollars in equipment, but 3 trained crew members killed, wounded, or psychologically shattered. What Ukraine has demonstrated isn't just winning a specific battle or campaign. They've revealed the future of mechanized warfare, and it's a future where traditional armor is increasingly vulnerable. For a century, the main battle tank has been the dominant ground weapon system. Heavily armored, powerfully armed, mobile, and intimidating. But that dominance was predicated on one assumption: that the enemy couldn't easily detect and target them. That assumption no longer holds. In an era of ubiquitous sensors, satellites, drones, ground-based radars, acoustic detection systems, armor cannot hide. And when you cannot hide, precision fires will find you. Military strategists worldwide are watching Ukraine and asking fundamental questions. If tanks are this vulnerable to precision artillery, do they still have a future? Should armies invest in active protection systems, electromagnetic defenses, or distributed operations? Or should they simply accept that the age of massed armor is ending? Some answers are already emerging. Active protection systems, like Israel's Trophy, can intercept incoming projectiles, but they're expensive and have limitations against top-attack artillery. Electronic warfare can disrupt precision guidance, but it's a game of measures and countermeasures. The most significant change may be tactical. If large concentrations of armor attract devastating fires, then perhaps the solution is dispersion. Smaller units spread across wider areas, making detection and targeting more difficult. This is the concept of distributed lethality. Instead of 20 tanks advancing together, you have 20 individual tanks operating independently across a broad front, coordinated through digital networks but physically separated to avoid mass casualties from precision strikes. Western militaries are already adapting their doctrine based on Ukrainian lessons. NATO exercises now emphasize rapid displacement, electronic warfare integration, and counter-drone operations. The U.S. Army is accelerating development of extended-range precision artillery, and the evolution continues. The next generation of weapons may include railguns with ranges exceeding 100 kilometers, directed energy systems that can destroy incoming shells mid-flight, and fully autonomous loitering munitions that can identify and engage targets without human input. But those are tomorrow's weapons. Today, on the fields of eastern Ukraine, the revolution is happening with systems that, in many cases, are decades old, just employed with new intelligence, new coordination, and new determination. The story of Ukrainian artillery isn't really about weapons, it's about adaptation, about how a military force, outgunned and outnumbered, found a way to turn their disadvantages into strengths. They took Cold War-era artillery and integrated it with commercial drones. They combined Western precision systems with Ukrainian ingenuity and courage. They transformed artillery from a blunt instrument into a surgical tool. In doing so, they've changed warfare itself. Every military planner, every defense contractor, every strategic thinker is now reassessing long-held assumptions about mechanized combat. The lessons from Ukraine will shape military doctrine for decades to come. But for the Ukrainian crews firing these guns, it's not about military history or future doctrine. It's about survival. It's about protecting their homes, their families, their nation. Every successful strike is one less Russian tank threatening their cities. Every mission is personal. And so the invisible war continues. Every day, across hundreds of kilometers of front line, Ukrainian artillery crews are repeating this deadly mathematics: target identified, coordinates transmitted, shells fired, impact, each strike a small victory in a larger struggle. This is how wars are won in the 21st century, not with dramatic charges or decisive battles, but with precision, persistence, and the courage of crews who fire their guns, knowing that every shot reveals their position, knowing that the enemy is hunting them just as they hunt the enemy, knowing that survival depends on being faster, smarter, and more adaptable than their opponent. Welcome to the future of warfare. It's invisible, it's precise, and it's absolutely lethal. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay analytical, and we'll see you in the next video.